I didn't mean to listen. I swear to God, I didn't. I had only gone through the side gate because my knees were aching that afternoon, and the backyard path was shorter than walking all the way around the front of the house. The sun was warm. The wind was gentle. Everything felt ordinary. Too ordinary, I suppose, for what I was about to hear. My daughter's voice drifted through the open patio door. At first, I couldn't make out every word, just bits and pieces. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, someone shifting a chair. Then I heard it, clear as day. Why is she even still alive? The words didn't sound like a joke. They didn't sound like frustration. They landed heavy, sharp, cold. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard. The mind does strange things when the heart doesn't want to accept the truth. I stood there, frozen beside the hydrangea bush I planted the year her first child was born. My hand rested against its leaves like I might fall over. Without it, someone else laughed. A man's voice, my son-in-law. She just keeps hanging on, he said, like she's got nothing better to do. Another laugh followed, lighter this time, feminine. My daughter again. Well, she said, we just have to be patient, don't we? Patient. The word echoed inside my chest in a way I still don't have words for. I stood there in my daughter's backyard, the same backyard where I once pushed her on a swing, the same yard where she took her first steps, the same place where she cried into my arms after her first heartbreak. And now, inside that house, my continued breathing was being discussed like an inconvenience. The air felt thick. My ears rang. I remember thinking, strangely, that my shoes had leaves stuck to the bottom of them. That detail stayed with me because everything else felt unreal. I didn't cry right away. I didn't move right away either. I just stood, listening. There were more words after that. Plans spoken in low voices. Legal words. Property, papers, a timeline. They weren't talking about my health. They were talking about my absence. The kind that doesn't require a goodbye. My fingers trembled against the leaves. My stomach turned so hard I felt sick. And in that moment, standing just feet away from my own child, something shifted inside me that had been quiet for years. I stopped being only her mother, and I started being a woman again. I stepped away from the window without making a sound. My feet carried me around the side of the house, like I was moving through water. Slow, heavy, careful not to be seen. By the time I reached my car, my hands were numb. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the key. I didn't go home right away. I drove past the grocery store where I used to buy her favorite cereal, past the park where her father taught her to ride a bike, past the old library where we spent rainy Saturdays reading side by side. Every memory felt like it was being peeled away from me one by one. And somewhere between the third red light and the fourth stop sign, I realized something that changed the rest of my life. They thought I was already halfway gone. They were wrong. I went home that evening and sat alone at my kitchen table with the same cup of tea I drink every night. My hands shook as I held it. I stared at the reflection of my face in the dark window and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. 68 years old, widowed, still working part-time at the community center, still paying my own bills, still cooking my own meals, still alive, still thinking, still remembering, still capable. And yet, to my own child, I was already being spoken of as if I were a problem waiting to finish itself. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Once you hear something like that, true sleep doesn't come easily anymore. What I did instead was think. I thought about the years I stayed awake beside her crib, the moves I delayed because she needed stability, the jobs I turned down because they didn't fit her school schedule, the savings I drained to help her through college, the house repairs I put on credit so she could have a wedding without worry. I thought about how proud I was when she introduced me as her best friend just 10 years ago. And then I thought about the voices I heard in that backyard and how calm they sounded. This isn't only a story about betrayal. It's a story about what happens when a mother finally listens. It's about quiet endurance pushed too far. It's about dignity rebuilt after it's been quietly stripped away. It's about how the same hands that once rocked a child to sleep can still be steady when it matters most. And what happened after that afternoon didn't happen in a single explosion. It happened slowly, in small choices, in silent steps, in letters that were never expected, in truths that were never planned to be spoken out loud. Nothing unfolded fast, but everything unfolded completely. If you've ever felt dismissed by the people you sacrificed for, if you've ever sat in silence with words burning in your chest, if you've ever wondered whether your existence still carries meaning in rooms where it once mattered most, then stay with me. And before we go any further, I want to gently ask you something from the heart. If stories like this speak to your life, if they remind you that you are not alone, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support allows these stories to keep reaching the people who need to hear them most. Coming back to the story, that night, after I finally laid down in the dark, I reached for something I hadn't touched in years. A small envelope tucked into the back of a dresser drawer. Inside it were papers I once prepared for, just in case. And for the first time in a very long while, I opened them. The envelope felt thinner than I remembered. The paper inside had yellowed at the edges, soft from age. I had written those documents after my husband passed, when the house felt too quiet and the nights too long. I never expected anyone to rush his absence. Back then, I only wanted to protect what little stability I had left. But now, the reason was different. I read every line slowly. I didn't rush. There was no panic in me anymore. Just clarity. A calm that comes after your heart has already taken its deepest wound. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Toast, 1 egg, black coffee. I sat at the table where my husband once folded his paper and tapped ashes into a small glass tray. The chair across from me stayed empty, as it had for years. That part I was used to. What I wasn't used to was understanding that my own daughter no longer saw me as part of her future. Later that morning, I drove to the community center for my shift. The same front desk, the same smile pasted across my face, the same people asking how my grandchildren were doing. I answered the same way, I always did. They're growing so fast. No one needs to know your heart is breaking. During my lunch break, I sat alone in the staff room and stared at my phone. My daughter's name was at the top of my contacts. I didn't call. I didn't text either. Not yet. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Her name was Ruth. We met when our kids were in kindergarten together. We drifted apart over time like people do, but she always sent me a card on my birthday. Always remembered. She answered on the second ring. "Well," she said, her voice warm and surprised. "This is a nice sound to hear." I didn't explain everything. I didn't have the strength. I only said I needed to talk. She told me to come over whenever I liked. So after my shift, I drove to her small white house on Pine Street. The porch light was on even though it was still daylight. We sat at her kitchen table with tea between us. I watched the steam curl upward while my hands trembled around the cup. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. And that was all it took. The words spilled out of me like water from a cracked jar. The backyard, the laughter, the sentence that dissolved something forever inside my chest. Ruth sat very still. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long quiet between us. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "That's not forgetfulness," she said softly. "That's decision." Her words settled into me in a way that felt strangely steady. That night, something began to change in the way I carried myself. I still loved my daughter. That love had never gone anywhere. But I stopped bending forward in case I was needed. I stopped waiting by the phone. I stopped planning my days around invitations that rarely came anymore. For the first time in years, I planned around myself. Over the next few weeks, I moved quietly, not in anger, not in spite, just with intention. I visited my lawyer. I updated my documents. I transferred certain accounts. I placed my personal papers somewhere safe. I told no one what I was doing, not because I was being secretive, but because I was being careful. And all the while, my daughter continued living as she always did. She still called when she needed someone to watch the kids. She still showed up late and left early. She still spoke quickly and distracted, her mind already elsewhere. My health began to come up more often in conversation. "You should really think about downsizing," she told me one day. "Too much space for one person." Another time, she asked if I had updated my beneficiaries. Once, she even asked where I kept my keys when I slept. I answered lightly, casually, with the same polite smile I had always worn. She never noticed the difference in me. People who feel entitled to you rarely do. One evening, she invited me to dinner. That alone should have caught my attention, but by then I had learned not to read too deeply into anything she said. The house was full when I arrived. Her husband, the children, a few friends I barely recognized. Laughter filled the rooms. I brought nothing but a small dessert. She kissed my cheek quickly and guided me past the others into the kitchen. "You missed the best part," she whispered. "We were just talking about inheritance laws. Can you believe how complicated it all is?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and something in her eyes flickered before she turned back to the stove. Dinner passed in small talk. polite questions, harmless comments. But beneath it all, there was a current that pulled at me quietly. When I left that night, I stood on her porch and turned back just before stepping off. "You know," I said softly, "I used to carry you on my hip through this same doorway." She blinked, startled. "I know, Mom," she said quickly. "You've told that story before." But she didn't tell me to stay longer. She didn't walk me to my car. She didn't need to. As the seasons shifted, my health began to falter in small ways. Nothing dramatic enough to alarm anyone, just enough to change how my days felt. I moved slower. I rested more. Some mornings felt heavier than others. Still, I said nothing. Not to her. Not to the doctors either. And during that quiet time, I started writing. Every evening, I sat at my table with a notebook and wrote what I had never said, what I had swallowed, what I had carried alone for years. All the while, my daughter continued to make plans without me. Holiday dinners, birthday trips, weekends away. Sometimes I saw the pictures online before I even heard about the events themselves. The world didn't suddenly turn against me. It simply moved forward, without checking whether I was still behind it. Then came the afternoon that changed the rhythm of everything. I had gone to her house unexpectedly. No call, no warning, just a sudden feeling I couldn't explain. Her car was in the driveway. The yard was quiet, and the patio door was open. That was the afternoon I first heard the word timeline. That was the moment the air itself began to feel dangerous. I didn't go in right away. I stood behind the same hydrangea bush as before, and this time I listened with open ears. They didn't know I was outside. That was the strange power of that moment. I stood just beyond the curtain of their voices, unseen, unheard, while they spoke about me as if I were already a shadow fading from the wall. The doctor said it could be months. My son-in-law said, quietly, or longer. My daughter replied, but not years. Months. The word pressed against my chest like a slow, heavy weight. "And the paperwork?" he asked. "I've already located everything." She said, "The house, the accounts, the policies. I just need to be ready." Ready. I leaned back against the wooden fence because my legs no longer trusted themselves. "You're sure she hasn't changed anything?" he asked. "She wouldn't," my daughter said quickly. "She never does. She still thinks I'm that little girl who needs saving." They both laughed. That laugh didn't pierce me the way the first one had. This time, it hardened me. I took a slow step backward, then another. I didn't rush. I didn't slam a gate. I didn't make a sound. When I reached my car, I sat inside without starting it. The steering wheel felt cold in my hands. So this was the truth. Not neglect, not thoughtlessness, preparation. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I didn't cry either. I simply sat in the quiet of my living room and watched the clock change hour by hour. At midnight, I stood and walked to my bedroom. And for the first time since my husband passed, I slept deeply. The next morning, I called my lawyer again, not to ask questions, but to give instructions. Over the following weeks, I moved carefully. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I didn't reveal what I knew. I let them remain comfortable in the belief that nothing had changed. And in that quiet space, I began to prepare my own truth. At the same time, my daughter began calling more often, checking in, asking about my breathing, asking about my medications, asking if I felt dizzy. The change in her tone would have comforted me once. Now, it only confirmed what I already knew. One afternoon, she insisted on driving me to an appointment. "I worry about you being alone so much," she said, her hand already on my elbow. In the waiting room, she filled out forms for me without asking, answered questions before I could open my mouth. "She forgets things sometimes," she told the nurse. I smiled gently, but something tightened in my chest. At home later that evening, I stood in the bathroom looking at my reflection. I saw the soft lines around my mouth, the silver in my hair, the calm in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I wasn't fragile. I was simply quiet, and quiet made them careless. I began sorting through the closets, not because I was preparing to leave, but because I wanted to understand what I had built. Old photographs, letters, tax papers, jewelry my husband once saved 3 months' pay for, receipts from decades ago, evidence, memory, ownership. It took weeks. And during that time, the tension beneath the surface continued to stretch. Then came the call. "Mom," my daughter said, her voice unusually soft. "There's something we need to talk about." "All right," I said. "We want to make sure everything is in order." She continued, "Just in case." I said nothing. "We're thinking about sitting down with the lawyer soon." I paused before answering. "That's thoughtful of you," I said. There was a brief silence on the line. "I just don't want any confusion," she added. "Neither do I," I replied gently. We scheduled the meeting. It wasn't called a will reading, not officially, just a family planning discussion. The night before that meeting, I walked through my home room by room. The living room where I once sewed costumes for school plays. The kitchen where birthday cakes rose and fell. The hallway where backpack straps scraped the paint for years. The bedroom where my husband breathed his last. Every corner held something that had shaped me. None of it felt like something to be quietly claimed. The next morning, I dressed slowly, not in black, not in gray, but in soft blue, clear, steady. When we arrived at the office, my daughter and son-in-law were already there. They stood when I entered, smiled politely, too politely. The lawyer greeted me with professional warmth. We all sat. Papers were spread across the table. My daughter reached for one without asking. And then the lawyer looked at me instead of her. "Would you care to begin?" he asked. My daughter stiffened slightly. I placed my hand calmly on the table. "I believe," I said softly, "it would be best if you did." And for the first time, their certainty faltered. The room felt smaller once the lawyer began speaking. His voice was calm, measured, every word placed with care, but I could feel my daughter shifting beside me. I could feel her attention tugging forward, trying to pull the moment toward the ending she had already written in her mind. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the first folder. "These documents reflect the most recent updates," he said. "They were filed 3 weeks ago." My daughter's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. 3 weeks ago, that was the morning after the second time, I stood in her backyard and listened without being seen. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued, "We'll begin with property." My daughter leaned forward. "The residence at Maple Street." "That's the house," she interrupted quickly, "where Mom lives now." "Yes," he said calmly, "that residence," he paused, "is to be transferred into a living trust." My daughter's shoulders relaxed. She exchanged a glance with her husband and the beneficiary of that trust. The lawyer continued, "is not changing ownership at this time." Her smile flickered. He turned a page. "The current trustee is..." He looked up at me. "The client herself." Silence fell across the room. My daughter laughed lightly. "Well, yes," she said. "Of course it is. That's normal." The lawyer nodded. "But the successor trustee, should the trust ever require activation, is already designated." Her laughter stopped. "And the successor trustee," he said, "is not listed as an immediate family member." She turned toward me. "Mom." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "I made a different choice," I said. Her face tightened. The lawyer continued, his voice steady as water. "Financial accounts are next." She drew a short breath. "The primary checking and savings accounts have been restructured under the same trust." My daughter swallowed. "The contingency beneficiaries." She leaned forward sharply. "I'm sorry," she said. "Why are we talking about contingencies? Isn't this just a formality?" The lawyer met her gaze. "These documents govern control, not assumptions." Something close to panic flickered across her face. "And the beneficiaries?" she asked. The lawyer hesitated. "Then read the first name." It was not hers. Her husband shifted in his seat. My daughter reached for the paper. He gently pulled it back. "The remainder of the beneficiaries," he said calmly, "are designated based on charitable allocations and secondary accounts." Her face changed then. Not anger, not confusion, but recognition. I saw the moment it dawned on her that the ending she expected was no longer waiting at the bottom of the page. She turned toward me slowly. "What is this?" she asked. I met her eyes. "This is me taking responsibility for what I built," I said quietly. "No," she snapped. "This is you cutting me out. That depends on how you define inclusion." I replied. Her hands trembled. "You promised," she said. "Dad promised." I felt my chest tighten at the sound of his name. "Your father promised to love you," I said, "and I kept loving you after he was gone." "This isn't love," she said sharply. "This is punishment. It's protection," I said. "For who?" she demanded. "For the truth," I answered. The room felt thick with it now. Her husband looked between us, carefully silent. The lawyer sat still, waiting. "You think you're so clever," she said, "doing all this behind my back." "I didn't do it behind your back," I said. "I did it in front of my silence." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're sick," she said quickly. "You don't make decisions like this when you're not well." "I'm very well," I replied. She shook her head. "You're scared," she said. "That's all. You're mixing fear with control." Something tired moved through me then. Not anger, just exhaustion. I stood outside your patio door. I said softly, and I listened to you ask why I was still alive. The air cracked open. Her face drained of color. You're lying, she whispered. I listened to you discuss a timeline. I continued. I heard you talk about my house, my accounts, my breathing. Her husband stared at the floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't come here today to take from you. I said, I came here because you already tried to take from me. The lawyer shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. She pushed back from the table. You violated my privacy, she said weakly. No, I replied gently. You forgot tone carries through open doors. Tears welled suddenly in her eyes. I was just talking, she said. People talk. People reveal themselves when they think the waiting is over. I answered. Her husband finally spoke. You heard one conversation. He said, you don't know what we meant. I heard what you needed me to hear. I said. The room fell quiet again. The lawyer cleared his throat. Would you like me to continue? He asked. My daughter didn't answer. Her world had tilted. The safest version of the future she had rehearsed no longer existed. She stood slowly. This isn't finished, she said. No, I replied, but the pretending is. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the room. Her husband hesitated, then followed her. When the door closed behind them, the quiet felt different. Not heavy, not sharp, simply honest. The lawyer exhaled softly. You handled that with remarkable composure. He said, I wasn't composed. I replied, I was resolved. He nodded. Shall we secure the remaining documents? Yes, I said. When I stepped outside, afterward, the sun felt warm on my face. I didn't know where my daughter had gone. I didn't chase her. Some distances must be allowed to exist. That evening, I went home and sat at my kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, my phone stayed silent. No texts, no accusations, no apologies either. Just quiet. But late that night, just after midnight, the silence broke. My phone lit up. The screen displayed her name. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, she said, her voice uneven. We need to talk. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said, we do. Her voice on the phone didn't sound like the voice from the backyard. It didn't sound like the woman who laughed about timelines. It sounded smaller, unsteady. I'm listening, I said. There was silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like she had been running or crying or both. We didn't mean it like that, she finally said. The things you heard. I heard what you said. I replied. I was scared, she whispered. I still am. Fear doesn't excuse cruelty, I said gently, but it does explain it. She let out a shaky breath. I thought if I prepared early, it would hurt less later. Hurt who? I asked. There was no immediate answer. Talking about me as if I were already gone didn't protect you. I continued. It erased me. Her voice broke then. I didn't think you felt that way, she said. I didn't think my own child would measure my life in months. I replied. We stayed quiet together for a long moment. The distance between us stretched thin through wires and air and years of things never spoken. "Are you really sick?" she asked softly. "I am older," I said. "That much is certain. The rest is private." She hesitated. "I should come by?" She said. "Not tonight." I replied, "Tonight. Sit with what you heard yourself say." She didn't argue. "Good night, Mom," she murmured. "Good night," I answered. She didn't come the next day either, or the day after that, and something in me was grateful for the space. A week passed, then another. When she finally came to my door, she came alone. No husband, no children, no noise to hide behind. I opened the door and saw her standing there with eyes swollen from crying and hands empty of excuses. "I didn't bring anyone," she said quietly. "I noticed," I replied. We sat at the same kitchen table, where I once drank tea shaking with grief. This time, my hands were still. "I don't know how it got this bad," she said. "Small choices," I answered, "left unattended." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "I was tired," she whispered, "of worrying, of watching, of wondering when the phone would ring. So you decided to make the waiting smaller." I said. "Yes," she admitted, "and I became something to get past," I added. Her eyes filled again. "I didn't think you heard," she said. "People often speak loudest when they believe silence belongs to them." I replied. She looked at me then, really looked, not as obligation, not as inheritance, but as a woman with years still breathing behind her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. The words landed softly, not like salvation, not like victory, just truth. "I didn't raise you to be sorry," I said. "I raised you to be honest." She nodded. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You don't fix it," I replied. "You face it." Her shoulders sagged. "So what happens now?" she asked. "We speak plainly," I said, "and we accept what remains after the pretending is gone." She swallowed. "And the trust?" she asked carefully. "The money?" I made my decisions with a clear mind. I said, "They stand." She closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought anger would rise again, but it didn't. Instead, she nodded. "Then I'll live with that." That was the first honest thing she had said without defense. Weeks passed after that. Slowly, unevenly. Some days she called. Some days she didn't. We didn't return to the way things were, but something different began to form. Something thinner, more fragile, but real. Then came the morning that changed the shape of everything once more. I collapsed in my kitchen, not from illness, from fatigue, from years of carrying more than I admitted. When I woke, fluorescent lights hovered above me in the hospital ceiling. The first face I saw was hers. Not panicked, not rehearsed, just there. She held my hand in both of hers like she remembered how. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't go yet. I'm still here," I said. Her tears fell onto the blanket. That night, she sat with me until dawn, not because she was afraid of losing something, but because losing me had suddenly become real. When I returned home, she came with me. She cooked, cleaned, listened. The house felt different with her in it again. Not full, but warmer. One evening, she stood beside me at the sink and said, quietly, "I forgot what your hands look like when you wash dishes." They haven't changed much. I replied. Yes, they have, she said. They're steadier than I deserve. Time passed, not magically, not cleanly, but honestly. And one afternoon, sitting on my porch together, she asked the question she had avoided for months. Did you ever stop loving me? She asked. No, I said without hesitation. Even after everything? Yes, I answered. She inhaled sharply. Why? Because love doesn't vanish when trust is broken. I said, it simply waits to see what the truth will do next. She rested her head against my shoulder, like she used to when storms came through the valley. I don't deserve that kind of love, she murmured. Few people feel they do. I replied, that has never stopped it from existing. We sat in silence as the sun lowered behind the trees. No lawyers, no documents, no timelines, just two women, one who once gave life and one who had finally learned how fragile it truly was. And now, before I leave you with this story, I want to leave you with this thought from a woman who has lived long enough to hear silence speak. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the hands that once held us smallest. Sometimes truth arrives after years of quiet. Sometimes the heart survives what pride tried to erase. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you miss, or someone you still need to understand, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to this channel. These stories carry the voices of many hearts that speak quietly, and your support keeps them alive. And if you are listening tonight feeling unseen, unheard, or dismissed, know this: you still matter, and it is never too late to be fully seen again.